Hi, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining.
This evening we're discussing fats. And in the past couple weeks, we've talked about the thermal effect of food and how your metabolic rate is affected by the types of food that you eat. Whenever you eat fats, your metabolic rate is increased by about 3 to 5%. For carbohydrates, it's increased by about 5 to 10%. And for proteins, about 17 to 20%. And this is just the excess amount of energy it takes for your body to process these things. We use this fire analogy to talk about how different types of macronutrients affect our energy levels. And we refer to a fire. Gasoline represents carbohydrates. When you throw gasoline onto a fire, it burns quickly and is also depleted quickly. The log represents protein. You put it on a fire, it burns a longer time, and you get a good burn from that. And this coal in this fire analogy represents fats, which we're talking about this evening. Fats, or lipids, as we'll call them, are the body's reserve source of energy. Our body holds on to fats to use it whenever it needs it. And the coal is a long burning source. It is the most dense nutrient that we consume. Carbohydrates and proteins contain 4 calories per gram, and in lipids or fats, you will get 9 calories per gram. So much more energy in a gram of fat versus carbohydrate or protein. Lipids should consist of about 10 to 40% of your total diet, and that's a pretty big range. It depends on your body and what your body needs, and we'll discuss that with you all individually, what is about right for your body. Some people don't need a lot, some people do need more. The benefits of lipids is, one, it adds flavor and aroma to food, and it can keep you full for a long time because it takes a while to digest. And the one of the best things about fat is it can carry fat soluble vitamins through your body, and of course it provides essential fatty acids, and those things are going to contribute to your overall cell health. So if maybe your skin or your hair, your nails, all of those things, they're going to be affected by the amount of fats or the right kind of fats being taken in. Fat isn't always just a lump of butter. It can be in a number of different things. It can be in meats, so poultry, fish, dairy products, eggs, nuts, baked products. It's in all of these different things, and we may be eating something and not thinking of it as a fat, as the main source of that macronutrient, but a lot of these different things that we eat contain fats in them, all the way from meats to vegetables. Fruits and vegetables, legumes, cereals, they have low amounts of fat in them, not nearly as much as you might find in meat or dairy products. There are a few different types of fats. Um, there are saturated fats and unsaturated fats. And generally, we think of saturated fats as being unhealthy fats, and then the saturated fats being fats that our bodies can possibly use. Um, Generally, saturated fats are solid at room temperature. So you can think of things like butter or coconut oil. Whenever it's at room temperature, it's solid. These saturated fats are generally derived from animal sources, and a couple of saturated fats that don't come from animal sources would be coconut oil and palm oil, they have high levels of saturated fats, but aren't animals. And then saturated fats are generally liquid at room temperature. So you can think of vegetable oils, a lot of the seed oils that we get, they primarily come from vegetables. Now, we always hear about hydrogenated fats. Well, what are those? Those are fats that have been altered with hydrogen. People use it to help the shelf life of their food or to help keep foods holding together. And they come from saturated fats, and they can form trans fats like what you might find in Crisco. The reason that they're bad is because they're high in low density lipids, or the bad cholesterol that we hear about, and that's contributes to heart disease. So we want to keep our low density lipids low. So staying away from saturated fats and trans fats, our bodies don't really need them. But fats are important to your body, and that's one thing I want you all to take away from this is you have to have fats. You can't cut any one macronutrient out of your body. Part of our purpose for sharing all this information with you over the past several weeks and in the future is that you understand you've got to be getting balanced nutrition, and you can't be afraid of carbohydrates or afraid of lipids. You've got to be getting the right kind and in the right amounts at the right time. So the types of fats you do want to be getting are high density lipids that aren't going to create plaque on the veins. So Michael will go over that here in a little bit, but these different types of lipids are used differently by the body. So it's important to be aware of what types of fats are good and what types aren't. There's this chart here that you can compare these different fats. So fats that generally come from seeds and vegetable sources are going to have higher levels of the omega-9 fatty acids. And then whenever you get toward butter, lard, coconut oil, these things have higher levels of saturated fat. So even though you're looking at maybe one thing that looks the same, palm oil, and then looking at sunflower oil, they contain very different levels of types of fat content. So make yourself aware of these things. And when you look at a nutrition label, pay attention to what you're purchasing.
Great. Thanks, Renee. Let's see if we can turn it over to me. It looks like you're going to have to transition each slide, Renee. So fats are actually broken down into basically three main categories. When you consume fat, they're broken down into either phospholipids, triglycerides, or cholesterol. Phospholipids are important because they help with structural membrane formation. Triglycerides are important because they form fatty acids, which you use during aerobic activity, or glycerol, which your brain uses as fuel. And then cholesterol is broken down into your good and your bad cholesterol, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. Next slide. So digesting fat, basically what happens, can you transition to the next slide?
I gave you the mouse. Do you have it?
Right.
It's not letting me.
Not a long transition.
I'm sorry about that. Okay, try again. You should have it now.
Yeah, up. Well, so how fat is actually broken down, bile emulsifies the plump fat. Bile is actually produced in the liver and then it's stored in the gallbladder. And when bile is released into the stomach, it starts separating the fat. And then lipase, which is actually released by the pancreas, starts breaking the fat down into smaller compounds, and that's when it actually breaks it down into triglycerides, phospholipids, or cholesterol. Next slide, please. So when fat is typically broken down in the small intestine, and then there's a substance that's released by the small intestines called chylomicron. And what that does is that actually further breaks fat down into triglycerides, phospholipids, and cholesterol. And it's actually a lipoprotein particle that helps transport the fat. And when fat is broken down into triglycerides, phospholipids, and cholesterol, then it's actually filtered by the liver. Next slide, please. And this is really important to know because the majority of fat is actually broken down in the liver. About 75% of fat metabolism actually happens in the liver. And it's the primary place where the body literally breaks down fat. And you've heard the term fatty liver. Well, when the liver isn't functioning as efficiently, for example, if you're eating high-fat foods or increasing your sugar, your alcohol intake, what happens is you're going to start producing more fat, and of course the liver is going to have a hard time functioning efficiently. So one of the things that we recommend when clients are trying to lose weight is even to take like a mild a supplement with like a milk thistle, which can actually help them start helping them or help their liver function more efficiently. So when fat enters the liver, what happens is, or when the phospholipids, triglycerides, and cholesterol enter the liver, what happens is, the next slide please, your body actually wants to hold on to HDL, which is the good cholesterol. And then the phospholipids, the triglycerides, the LDL, and the VLDL, and actually the ILDL, which is another form of cholesterol, are then released into the bloodstream. The next slide. And when like I mentioned before, when phospholipids are released into the bloodstream, they're a class of lipids that help with cell membrane formation and tissue repair. So, and they're extremely important because your cells contain this outer membrane. It's called a phospholipid membrane, and it's made up of phospholipids. So they're directly involved with all structural membrane formations. Next slide. And when triglycerides enter the bloodstream, they're either converted to glycerol, which your brain uses as fuel, or they're converted to fatty acids, which you use during aerobic activity. And when you eat, your body converts any calories it doesn't need into triglycerides, which then it'll store it into your fat stores. And this is really important because when you eat high-calorie foods or high carbohydrate foods, your body's going to utilize what it needs to, and then it's going to store the rest in your adipose tissue or in your fat stores. Next slide, please. And when cholesterol is broken down, it's broken down into HDL, LDL, VLDL, and then IDL. HDL stands for your high-density lipoproteins. LDL stands for your low-density lipoproteins. The VLDL stands for very low-density lipoproteins, and the IDL, which is another one, it stands for intermediate density lipoproteins. Basically, the LDL, the VLDL, and then the IDL are your bad forms of cholesterol, and the HDL is your better form of cholesterol. Cholesterol is used to build cells and certain hormones. It isn't bad, but it can cause heart disease, heart attack, and stroke, especially the bad forms of cholesterol. But they play an important role in stellate formation, muscle synthesis, plaque formation, and then essential fats. Next slide, please. So, and this is what I want to end with, but we want to talk about plaque formation. What happens is when the artery wall needs repaired, what happens is the LDL and the VLDL and the IDL forms of cholesterol will go in and they'll start attaching to the artery wall. In the next slide. And when that happens, they start clumping together, and go ahead and go to the next slide. And then they start forming, basically, a plaque buildup. And go on to the next slide. And this next one here shows you a good example of what happens when blood is passing through the artery wall. It starts actually blocking the artery and restricting the blood flow. And what happens, and go ahead and go to the next slide, the HDL, which is released by the liver, because like I said, majority of it's stored in the liver, it actually has to come in, bind to the LDL, the VLDL, and the IDL forms of cholesterol and help break them up, which go to the next slide. And so what happens is if you have your good cholesterol will come in and it'll help actually bind to the bad forms of cholesterol so that the artery wall is repaired and that no plaque is further built up. There's a couple other things that I'd like to note. We talked about your fat intake being anywhere from 10 upwards of 40%. Now that really depends on the individual, but your fat intake should normally be right around 20%. And let me explain why. When your fat intake is over 20%, and it does vary with each individual, but kind of the general rule of thumb is if you want to be less than 20%, consume less than 20% fat. And anybody that's really serious about leaning out, we recommend that they take in about 20% or less. And of course, they need to balance their other macronutrients, and that means taking in about 50% carbohydrates and about 30% protein. That macronutrient balance will actually help a person start leaning out a little bit faster, like Renee talked about at the beginning. But fats play a very important role in making sure that you're able to lose fat efficiently. If you're not eating the right amount, the right kinds of fat, your body's not going to be able to burn fat effectively because you're not going to be able to have the lipoproteins necessary to be able to transport the fat so it can be used as energy. So I hope this helps. We really appreciate everybody taking the time to jump on the call, and we'd like to go ahead and open it up to any questions that anybody might have.